In the spring of 2003, when Baghdad's facades cracked and the night became an open market of loss, a young man learned an economy of ruin. He was one of thousands displaced by the US-Iraq war. But unlike most refugees, he left with more than fear. He left with plunder. Palaces once bustling with guards stood suddenly unguarded. Rooms that had been forbidden opened like barns. He slipped through courtyards and basements, taking what could be moved. Jewelry, weapons, hard currency hidden in safes and mattresses. Those takeaways bought something far more dangerous than a ticket out of the country. They bought him anonymity and the services of human smugglers, who saw the value in a man who already knew how to cross forbidden lines. By 2004, he had a forged passport and a route. Syria, Turkey, Hamburg. Hamburg became a staging ground. He stayed only long enough to shed recognition and assume a new register of quiet. From the port, a ferry carried him across the Baltic to Denmark. Copenhagen presented a glossy profile to tourists and policymakers alike. But underneath its ordered streets lay neighborhoods where violence ran like an undertow. Vesterbro's bars and back alleys harbored dealers and enforcers. Immigrant communities coalesced into uneasy alliances. Two handlers still operating from the Middle East, he was an asset. Single, mobile, willing. They framed assignments in dry business terms. He framed his own rule in one: half the fee before the act. Proof would come later in a photograph, transmitted by courier or email. It was cold, procedural trade and death. Act. The journalist. His first recorded contract in Denmark was a journalist, a critic of extremist clerics and the networks that funded them. The journalist was careful in his life and careless in trusting the anonymity of exile. The assassin followed for weeks, learning rhythms. Buses, the coffee shop with the chipped cup, the door that stuck in wet weather. The night he moved, he blocked the stairwell to avoid witnesses, used wire to incapacitate, and finished the job inside a quiet flat. He arranged the scene with care and took a photograph, a clinical token sent back as proof. The act itself, for him, was both a transaction and an assertion, a way to send a message across borders. The journalist's death was meant to silence more than a single voice. It was a warning to those who would speak of the networks that funded murder. The banker. The second contract was money forward, an Iraqi banker who had siphoned oil funds and built a new life under another name. The assassin posed as a courier, carrying a package that would grant entrance. Inside the apartment, he used restraint and intimidation. The execution was quiet, but deliberate. He left things staged to look like robbery, but investigators would later note the signature markers, specific bindings, a pack of cigarettes left on a windowsill, the angle of the photographer's shot that linked this killing to the earlier one. The banker's disappearance set off quiet alarms in certain financial circles. Transfers and shell accounts came under scrutiny. For the assassin, this job fortified his reputation. He could remove a hidden man and make it look like something else. The Imam. By mid-2006, the third operation was designed to be more than a removal. It was spectacle. The target, a rival imam whose sermons had begun to fracture the solidarity of a diaspora congregation and who had allegedly criticized handlers from abroad. The murderer tracked public appearances. Timed exits from the mosque when crowds thinned and relied on speed and a small-caliber sidearm to minimize noise. The shooting happened quickly, in the half-light of dusk, and the killer dispersed into the mass of leaving worshippers. The public nature of the attack was the point. Terror where it should have been safe. The violation of a civic ritual. It sent ripples through immigrant communities and intensified police attention, especially from units that specialized in politically motivated crimes. Profile of a predator. Between jobs, he cultivated a life that distracted more than it hid. He rented apartments under various names, drank at clubs where faces blurred, and took flights to other European cities, Paris, Amsterdam, sometimes returning to Hamburg. That lifestyle was part mask, part indulgence. Always solitary, he kept no family close. Ties could be leveraged, as he told himself. Operationally, he was meticulous. Every approach rehearsed, every exit planned, every trace minimized. Evidence showed a preference for methods that left ambiguous signatures. Wire strangulations, staged robberies, single-shot executions, so murder inquiries split across departments and borders. At the same time, he demanded upfront payments that meant networks trusted him. He was efficient. He was an instrument. The final contract, an American in Copenhagen. In 2007 came the assignment that would undo everything. Handlers described the mark as an American who had intervened in ventures tied to their interests, a man to remove. The assassin followed a middle-aged tourist through museums and backstreets, an unremarkable figure who had once been anything but. What the assassin didn't know was that this man had been forged under training far older than doctrine or diplomacy, a Green Beret, retired but not naive. For weeks, the killer watched, cataloged routes, memorized pauses at crosswalks. He sharpened a blade and bought materials to ensure quick disposal. What he did not foresee was the subject's reflex, muscle memory honed over tours, split-second decisions that turned the hunter into prey. The confrontation took place near the freight yards on a rainy night. The assassin struck from behind, aiming to incapacitate. The American reacted. Training turned reaction into advantage, a wrist catch, a leverage throw, an immediate attempt to control the weapon. The two men collided in a confined space. Blows were traded. The fight was brutal, but precise. No cinematic flourishes, only the grim arithmetic of survival. At one point, the soldier disarmed the attacker and used his momentum to push him off balance toward the tracks. The final sequence was chaotic and swift. A freight train barreling through, lights cutting through rain. The result was immediate and final. When authorities reached the scene, they found the assassin's effects, identifying photographs, a forged passport, the encrypted phones, and a discreet ledger of transactions. One small photograph, scrawled with a note in a foreign hand, tied the body to earlier killings. Forensics compared ballistic marks, chemical traces from adhesives used on binding, and digital transaction logs. The pattern was unmistakable. The same operator, the same network. The investigation pivoted from a local homicide squad to national counterterrorism units. Intelligence agencies traced financial conduits back through shells to accounts linked to a cell in the Middle East. The assassin's death had opened a door that investigators had been trying to find for years. The handlers felt exposed. Some vanished into false identities. Others were captured in simultaneous arrests across several countries. Interrogations and intercepted communications painted a broader picture of funding, recruitment, and logistics. Assets were targeted. Locations were struck through coordinated operations that spanned borders. The dismantling of the cell was not simple or clean. Collateral damage, diplomatic tensions, and disputed intelligence followed. But pieces of the network crumbled.
The man
Who began as a looter and became an instrument of targeted killing, was finished in a way he had once dictated for others. Alone, without the comforts of the life he'd purchased. For Copenhagen, and for those touched by his actions, the arc of his life became a cautionary tale, how wars, displacements, can seed new violences, and how transnational networks can export conflict into peaceful cities. This story leaves more questions than answers. How many other acts went unnoticed? Which of his victims were silenced in ways never publicized? Reaction in communities, the fear, the silence at mosques, the whispered accusations persisted long after police files closed. For the soldier who intervened that night, the outcome was a grim, private calculus, an act of defense that also pulled a thread tight enough to unravel an entire fabric of conspirators. For historians and documentarians, the case is a study in entropy, how chaos in one place migrates, mutates, and feeds off the loopholes of distant systems. For viewers, it's a reminder that violence travels light, and that the human costs of conflict rarely stop at borders.